Are you having paint sprayer troubles? Can't keep your gun upright? You keep getting tangled in the hose? Stop wasting gallons of finish from unwanted tip-overs! Introducing Paint Stand. Build your own in 37 easy steps.
Hi, welcome to Werks. Today is another episode of my 52 cards in 52 weeks challenge. Last week I drew this 3 of diamonds, which says paint gun holder, so that's what we'll be building today.
So I started with this old can of lacquer thinner that I wanted to make a drip tray for the bottom. I tried to poke a hole with a screwdriver, but that didn't work so well, so I had to use a hammer behind it to puncture all the way through. When that was done, I could use some tin snips to chase around the whole thing. Now, I wanted to just cut the top free so it was a little easier to work with, and then I scribed a line around the bottom with a Sharpie. And I should have been wearing gloves here because this is really sharp, but I'll know for next time. And I cut around the edge, and then I cut a couple of reliefs so that I could fold that edge over, which I did with some linesman pliers. And this worked out just fine because this metal was so thin. With that edge folded over, I ran around with the pliers again to crimp the edge so it stays nice and flush. Moving on to the paint stand itself, I took a piece of plywood and drilled a 7/8 hole. I didn't drill all the way through so that I could have a nice clean hole and finish drilling from the backside. With that cut, I went over to the table saw blade and raised it all the way so that I don't cut too deeply into my hole, and then I have a nice slot that the paint gun will sit in. I wanted to have a dado that the nose cone would sit in, so I raised the blade up a little bit and just took a couple passes. And you can see that the gun nests in there, however, it tips forward, so I decided to go more for a side-mounted option. So I cut another hole and slot into the back side of the piece of plywood to kind of start over. And once that was done, I can cut that free from the piece. And I wanted this whole thing to fold up, so I decided to go for sort of a wooden hinge where I'm basically cutting a box joint where I have one tab on one side and 2 tabs on the other that interlock. To start, I'll just cut that one slot in this piece, and in the opposing piece, I'm going to cut the opposite profile. So I can use a pencil to lay that out, and then I can head over, and to cut that, I just took a couple passes with the saw blade, and I'm using a clamp here to keep this secure to my miter fence because this is just a little piece and I would not want my fingers that close to the blade. But after a couple passes, I have my slot cut, and to make these so they fold, they need to be rounded over, so I just used a belt sander and clamped it to my workbench and just gave them a nice round over it, so that way the pieces will interlock with each other but not interfere when they fold in. Moving on to this piece on the back, I wanted 2 bolts to hold the thing in. So I'll start by drilling some holes, and I wanted to use bolts so that I could use wing nuts on the other side so that I could easily take this thing apart. And then I could tap those bolts into place. Not perfect work, but it's pretty good. And then I transferred those same hole locations to the back piece of the stand, making sure to pre-drill everything because I'm drilling into plywood. I don't want anything to split. That little back mount I can glue and screw. The screws are really just to hold it in place while the glue dries. So I'm just going in nice and light with the screws so that I don't split anything. Then I can cut that bottom piece free. Moving back to the part that tips on the top, I cut a couple holes, and I drilled from each side and keep those holes as straight as I could. And you can see how this kind of hinging action works, but this was a little bit sloppy and it just seemed a little bit unnecessary, so I decided to just do away with the whole thing and cut that right off. And then I was going to just glue and screw it in place, and that would really be fine. I just didn't want a big bulky item that was going to take up too much space, so I put some glue and screws in there. And then I went around with a little router bit with an 1/8 inch round over bit and took all the sharp corners off it and just smoothed this thing out. And then did a little light hand sanding after all of that. And with that done, I decided I wanted a couple magnets to hold the tray in the bottom. So I put a couple of these little neodymium magnets in. And unfortunately the tray is so thin that these don't really do much, but it was a nice idea. And putting that piece on the back, you can see those wing nuts just hold it in place so it comes apart nice and easily. Those bolts are probably a little long, but it's all I had. And then this paint gun sits right on there, and it works nice. You can see the drips fall right on the tray when you pull it out of the gun. That's one of the most annoying things, is having a mess all over your bench when you're right in the middle of spraying.
as simple as this project was, I think this is going to make a big difference for when I'm spraying finishes. It'll just be one less thing that I have to worry about. But with that, I'm going to pick my card for next week. Oh boy. 6 of spades. Jointer, infeed, and outfeed lock handle. That is going to be an interesting one, and you'll have to come back next week to see what that video is all about. As always, thanks for watching.